Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. We have another preview episode for you guys on this Wednesday morning. We got Patrick Brown from Vols 24/7 getting ready for Georgia's last SEC game of the regular season. Georgia getting ready to play Tennessee on Saturday afternoon, 3:30 Eastern Time kick. Number 1, Georgia. Number 18, Tennessee. Going to be a very interesting game, even though the stakes aren't quite what we thought might have been attached to this game. Still looks like it will be a very exciting game. So want to join and welcome Patrick to the show. Patrick, how is this Wednesday morning treating you as we get ready for what I think will be a really entertaining game on Saturday?
It's a good Wednesday morning. It's a beautiful mid-November day here in Knoxville. The foliage is always excellent, and the view of the mountains is really good on this sunny day. Hopefully, for you and Georgia fans, if you guys get to drive up, you'll get the scenery of East Tennessee as you make your way to Neyland Stadium.
Fingers crossed. I'll definitely be looking forward to that. So let's get a feel for this Tennessee team, Patrick, going into this game. Tennessee is 7-3, number 18 in the latest college football playoff ranking, coming off a really tough loss to Missouri. Just what's the vibe around this Tennessee game, around this Tennessee team, getting ready for this game, knowing that they've got quite a challenge on their hands playing this Georgia team?
Yeah, it's probably the lowest point, maybe vibe-wise, of the season. Tennessee just played really, really poorly against Missouri, and the 29-point loss, 36-7 was the final. It was the largest margin of defeat that the Vols have had under Josh Heupel. He's in his third season. This was his 36th game, I believe. And they just didn't play they really just didn't play well in any phase of the game. That was a top 15 matchup. You win that, even if you lose to Georgia or, don't have the SEC East on the line in this game this weekend, you still have a chance to go 9-3 and potentially get that 10th win in the bowl game, and that's a chance for you to have back-to-back double-digit win seasons, which, I mean, it's probably not happened at Tennessee and probably since maybe the late 90s, I guess, and that was when teams were playing 11 games in the regular season. So they kind of they played their worst game of the season, and so there's maybe not a lot of hope right now coming off that game. It's been sort of one of those kind of frustrating seasons. Obviously, Tennessee went 11-2 last season. Everybody was riding that high throughout the offseason. And this just kind of looked like an 8-4 team, really, since I think September when they went down to Florida and lost. You knew that to get this game to have, all the talk in the offseason about the SEC East and Tennessee's players and coaches, from Josh Heupel to some of the team's veteran leaders, they were open about it at media days, saying we're taking aim for the East. We didn't win it last season. That's what we're trying to get to Atlanta. You have to win the East to get to Atlanta. And we knew that with this game, with Georgia coming to Knoxville, that, the division was going to run through the Bulldogs, obviously, but Tennessee had to do its part to get this game to have implications for the division title, and they weren't able to do that. Obviously, had they won last week, you could have pointed at the Florida game, the second half at Alabama, and now it's just kind of, they're looking at an 8-4 season because they play Vanderbilt to close it out, and it's like 8-4 is not a bad season, but it's not one that's going to get everybody excited, especially after you just won 11. So that's kind of the vibe right now. But we'll see how Tennessee shows up. They're obviously a much better team at home than they are on the road, and if they're able to keep the crowd in it, maybe this game gets a little bit more exciting and a little bit more has a little bit more drama than maybe the spread and maybe some of the feel about it this week might suggest.
Looking back at that Missouri game, anyone who watched Georgia play Missouri could see, Tigers are very talented. And it seemed like for at least a half, that Tennessee-Missouri game was very competitive. And then it seemed like Cody Schrader got going, and that was basically all she wrote. When you look at that Missouri game, is there anything that you see that may, sort of replicate itself against Georgia? Things that Tennessee struggled to do against Missouri that we could see pop up on Saturday?
Well, I mean, where do you start? I mean, that was it was sort of an all systems failure. It was kind of weird. You touched on it, that it was a competitive game. Tennessee was driving late in the third and early in the fourth, down 2 scores. I'm always of the thinking that if you're down 2 scores, you're still quote unquote in the game, because you're kind of one play away from being one play away. So it was 22-7. Tennessee has a run that gets down into the I think it was going to be 1st and goal, and they have it called back for couple holding penalties that were a little, let's just say they were a little bit less egregious than what Alabama was not called for in the Tennessee game. And then they had another drive that was, I think, inside the 40, and it was sort of a weird play where Joe Milton went to throw on an RPO, and he hits the running back's arm, kind of flings the ball down the field. It's a fumble. Missouri recovers, and they went down to score the touchdown that sort of sealed the deal with about 6 minutes left. But, yeah, I mean, the defense, we'll start there. They gave up season highs in yards and yards per play. I think Missouri had 530 yards. Obviously, Cody Schrader had 320 on his own. The biggest issue, I think, on defense was they just could not get off the field. Missouri was 11 of 17 on third down. Brady Cook was really effective, escaping the pocket, getting outside the pocket, scrambling for some of those third and long plays. They were able to, a couple of them were third and shorts where they were able to just run it. And then I think Tennessee kind of wore down because at the end of the third quarter, Missouri had run 21 more plays. They had a 20-play drive in the first half. Tennessee ran just 3 plays in the first quarter on offense because Missouri was just controlling the ball because Tennessee's defense couldn't get off the field. And I think Missouri's been the best offense probably that Tennessee has played. And Georgia's probably going to be right up there too with their ability, with really their balance. Obviously, Georgia can throw the football with Carson Beck and Brock Bowers and some of the, Lad McConkey and some of those other weapons that they've got on the outside, and they can run the ball as well with that big offensive line. And now the running backs are starting to get it going. And it's probably the worst time for Tennessee to play Georgia just because Georgia's finally getting all of its players back, sort of gearing up for that run for that third title. So, and offensively, it was really just turnovers and sort of a continuation of what's been a problem all season is that Tennessee's been able to move the ball on offense, but without the explosive plays that they were just so good at last season with Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt and those guys, they've really struggled to sustain drives and finish drives. Their red zone touchdown percentage isn't very good. I think last week they had 6 drives, maybe 7 drives into Missouri territory, and they scored 1 touchdown. And they just, this offense is not as good as last season's to where if they get a holding penalty, if they get a false start, if they get penalties and other things, sort of self-inflicted mistakes, they can't overcome them because they're in 1st and 20, 1st and 15, what have you. So that's it. All of those things sort of played together in that game where it was kind of one of those deals where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And obviously it sort of exposed some of the flaws that this Tennessee team has. I think defensively, if you can block their defensive line, both in the run game and as a pass rush, Tennessee's one of the best teams in the SEC in terms of sacks. But if you can block them, you can throw on their secondary, which obviously was a big liability last season. And offensively, if you can shut down their run, Joe Milton in this past game and these wide receivers have not proven to be good enough to make you pay consistently. They might make some plays and move the chains on you from time to time, but it's if you're able to keep Tennessee from running the ball, and Tennessee's had the best rushing offense in the SEC. I think they might still do. But they're 7-0 when they run for 200 yards, but when they don't, throw in 3. So that's 200 yards is a lot on the ground, especially against good defenses. So that's sort of where this team is, and sort of all the shortcomings that we've sort of seen in bits and pieces throughout the season. They all kind of showed up in Columbia, and Tennessee's got to find a way to minimize those and try to fix them, or at least, like I said, minimize them to have a chance of being competitive and staying in this game against Georgia.
I want to ask you about specific parts of this Tennessee team. And let's start with that run game. They've been super productive, and it sort of from the outside seems like it's like a 3-headed monster with what they've been able to do at running back. What makes this team so good at running the football, and what are the strengths of those guys who get the majority of the carries?
Yeah, I think you have to start with the scheme. This isn't an offensive line that's just going to run it straight at you, line it up, put the ball on the ground, and run over you. It's not really smoke and mirrors either. They just, the way they spread the field with their offense, their wide receivers, they make defenses sort of commit. Are you going to play with 6 in the box with your 4 down front and 2 linebackers? Or are you going to shade a safety or maybe a nickel into the box to sort of support? Missouri kind of switched up how it plays defensively, and they played a 3-man front with really sort of a 3-3-5 where the third linebacker was a safety. And they would start, they kind of shaded guys toward the box at the snap. And if they read pass, they bailed into a zone coverage. But most teams have been willing this season, I think, to sit in six-man boxes and say, we're just not going to let you home run us down the field, which is what Tennessee was so good at last season. So they're playing with 2 high safeties. And Tennessee, a lot of times, has been able to run the football that way. Jalen Wright's their best running back. His growth over the course of his career has been really fun to watch. Where he's always been a guy that had some physical traits, but now the mental side of the game is where he's really improved. Where he has a really good feel for how blocks are developing. He has the ability to show some patience and some hesitation moves that can sort of make those second level defenders, whether it be a safety or a linebacker, commit to a gap, and he finds the other one and gets to the second level. The offensive line, they have a variety of schemes they use in terms of how they block, pin and pull. They'll pull tackles, they'll pull guards. The tight ends are heavily involved and have been pretty good in that part of the game. And so, when that execution is there, they're able to get those running backs, Jalen main two, that are able to get to the second level and make guys miss. And when you're able to make guys miss, you turn 4 and 5 yard runs into 10, 12, 15 yard runs. And that's where Tennessee's been really effective. Jabari Small is the other guy. He's maybe not as dynamic as the other two, but is sort of a steady veteran guy that they have. So that's why I've been able to average over 200 something yards a game. But again, if you're able to take that away, whether you're playing 7 in the box or you're able to win up front, which is what Missouri did, really regardless of what alignment Missouri was in, they were better on the defensive line. Their defensive line was really gave Tennessee's offensive line some trouble. But so if you can do that, you have a chance to slow this run game down. But for the most part, for a lot of the season, Tennessee's been really effective with their schemes and those running backs getting to the second level and making things happen.
Joe Milton came into this season with a lot of hype. There was a lot of preseason, people sharing highlight videos showing off his big arm. What have you made of the way Joe has played this year, his strengths and the things that, have been, things he needs to improve on?
I think Joe's biggest issue is that he's probably following Hendon Hooker. You never want to be the guy after the guy. And Hendon Hooker was certainly the guy for Tennessee really the past 2 seasons. And Joe has a big arm. It's just really not clicked in the passing game for much of the season. Sometimes it's been him being inaccurate or making wrong decisions. Sometimes it's been his receivers not making plays for him or not getting open. And sometimes there's been protection breakdowns where they have something open downfield, but Milton gets hit or he's off his spot and can't make the throw. He's just really been inconsistent, I think is probably the best way to put it, from game to game, from half to half. Even you look at the Alabama game, he was excellent in the first half in Tuscaloosa. Probably gave Tennessee what they were expecting and hoping for all season. He had the Orange Bowl performance. I think that probably led to a lot of the hype, that and his ability to throw the ball 80, 90 yards. That's obviously exciting stuff. And you think about when you have a quarterback like that the possibilities are endless, but he's just not been as consistent as maybe they'd hoped. You kind of got a baseline for him in the first few games where he completes 60-65% of his passes for 200 something yards and a couple touchdowns. He was effective as a runner for a stretch there. He had a couple games there, if you throw in the Alabama game and when they played at Kentucky, he was really good, where he was accurate, he was efficient, wasn't turning the ball over, which has sort of popped up at times as an issue for him. He obviously had a couple turnovers, including a pick 6 last week. But teams are defending him a little bit differently, where they're trying to take away those downfield shots and maybe playing a lot of zone. Missouri played a lot of drop 8 last week when they converted from how they were trying to defend Tennessee's run game. So he's just been sort of inconsistent up and down. He's not been, like I said, he's just not Hendon Hooker. And I think there were some hopes that he could be a little bit like Hendon, even though they're different quarterbacks. Milton's more of a pocket guy. He's not a big runner. Hooker was so good at making something out of nothing a lot of times, but that's not really Joe's game. And he's not seen the field well sometimes. There's times where he's really efficient running the offense and getting the football out to where it needs to go and on time. There's been times he's not made accurate throws and has thrown the ball in the coverage too. So it's just sort of up and down, where one drive he'll look great. Tennessee's been really good to start games this season. I think they've had touchdowns on 7 of their first on opening drives on 7 of their 10 games. So they've been good to, at times, but then they just kind of go into lulls and, make mistakes that he's not really, when other parts of the offense aren't clicking, he's not been able to really elevate him and pull Tennessee out of it like Hendon was so good at doing.
You mentioned Tennessee starting game strong. That's going to be something to watch on Saturday, because Georgia has really struggled at getting stops on opponents' opening drives. Wanted to look at the receivers. You lose a guy like Brew McCoy during the season, obviously a huge loss. Who has stepped up at receiver in the time that he's been out?
Well, it was starting to be Dante Thornton Jr., who was a transfer from Oregon that Tennessee was really excited about. They thought he could be sort of a replication of Jalen Hyatt with his speed. He's, a 23, 24 mile per hour guy. According to him, that's what they said. They clocked him at Oregon last season during a game. And his first season has just been not he just had a hamstring injury that kept coming back, hurt him, bothered him in spring, bothered him in camp. I think he missed the South Carolina game. And he was working in the slot behind Squirrel White, who was the next guy behind Jalen Hyatt. Squirrel obviously played really well in the Orange Bowl, had some good moments last season as a freshman. But when Brew McCoy went down, they started Chaz Nimrod, who's a redshirt freshman, there for a few games, and they slid Thornton from the slot outside. And he had put 3 really good games together. He had a couple big plays against Kentucky in his first start for Tennessee there. Had a good caught a pass to convert a 3rd down against UConn that was an explosive play. And then he makes a great play last week against Missouri where he fights back through some coverage to haul in a touchdown pass, makes a great catch, kind of pulls the ball off the turf. But unfortunately, he hurt his ankle, I think, on that play pretty bad, and was on crutches and in a boot, and he's not going to play the next 2 games, and they'll see where he's at for the bowl game. So that was starting to be the guy, and now he's hurt. So Tennessee's not very deep at wide receiver, and they've not been very good there this season. Squirrel White's probably been their best guy out of the slot. He's a small guy. Georgia recruited him a little bit late in the cycle after he had a big senior year for his team. I think he's from outside of Birmingham. So Georgia and Auburn were a couple teams that tried to push for him late coming out of high school, and he's probably been their best guy. Ramel Keaton was the guy that stepped up last season for Cedric Tillman, but he's not been as good. And then, like I said, they've sort of struggled to replace Brew McCoy, who was sort of their bully ball kind of guy out on the perimeter. But even then, the pass game was just not clicking early on, and then they've kind of struggled at receiver at times with drops and guys not getting open or making plays downfield. So in terms of this game, they're going to be looking at Nimrod or another redshirt freshman, Caleb Webb, guys that I think the staff likes, but there's just not a lot of experience. And now you're going to be asking them to go up against guys that are going to be in their face. We saw how physical Georgia was with Tennessee's receivers last season. That was a huge difference in that game. And it's going to be a tough challenge. And obviously I think they're going to need Squirrel White to have a big game to have any chance. And we'll see if they scheme anything up, get the tight ends involved. But certainly this receiving core it's pretty thin now when you take Brew and Dante Thornton out there anyway. They didn't have a lot of numbers there, and now they've got 2 of their top guys, and it was a shame for Thornton to get hurt because he was finally starting to kind of turn the corner and build some confidence and make some plays for Tennessee.
The Joe Moore Award semifinalists were named on Tuesday. Georgia was one of those teams. Tennessee was also one of those teams for being up for the award for the best offensive line in the country. How would you evaluate how this offensive line has played to this point in the season?
Well, I think them getting nominated for that award is notable. There were probably some Tennessee fans after how the offensive line played against Missouri who were a little confused maybe by it. They obviously didn't play great at the line of scrimmage in that game. Season low, I think 83 rushing yards. But when you're top 2 leading the SEC in rushing, Tennessee's only given up I think 16 sacks all season. When you have numbers like that for the offensive line, that's such a tough position, a tough unit to evaluate. Those things are going to stand out and probably get you in a situation like that. And I'm not saying that they've played badly. I actually think it's probably a credit to how they've been able to piece it together because they had it last season. They had Darnell Wright at right tackle. He was the number 10 pick in the draft, all SEC player. They had Jerome Carvin, who was a 40-something game starter at left guard. They lose those 2 guys, and it seems like this season they've had to sort of piece it together almost every week. Cooper Mays is their was a preseason all SEC center. Easy for me to say. He didn't play in the first 4 games after he had to undergo a hernia surgery. Cooper Mays obviously would be a familiar name for Georgia fans because he's Cade's younger brother. He's a senior, and since he got back, Tennessee's played better. But they've had guys in and out of the lineup throughout the season. Let's see. I want to say they've started 7 or 8 different guys just through injuries, and they've had to make adjustments in game. They've had a guy in Dane Davis who was a former walk-on that had to play center early in the season because they didn't really have a lot of options there behind Cooper Mays. And then he had to finish the Alabama and the Texas A&M games at right tackle because guys got hurt. So they just sort of had to piece it together, and there's been a lot of moving pieces. And, we talked about Milton earlier. He's been up and down, but there's been a lot of moving pieces and a lot of guys in and out of the lineup around him at wide receiver and offensive line too. So that's sort of hindered this offense and kept it from coming really close to what they were last season. But this offensive line that, they can execute pretty well in the run game at times. They can be physical at times. And Their pass protection, I think, has been okay throughout the season, but certainly they'll be looking to bounce back as the rest of the team will. But I think that them beating that award, I think, was probably a credit to what they've done this season, even though they've been second best, I think, in the trenches in each of their 3 losses. And obviously they're going to face a tough challenge in this game on Saturday.
When you look to the other side of the ball, what is Tennessee's strength on defense? What do they do well this season? And who are the names that Georgia fans should keep an eye out for when it comes to the Volunteers defense?
Yeah, it's the defensive line. You kind of touched on it earlier. If Tennessee is able to stop the run and affect the quarterback, that's where this defense is at the best. I think they're second in the SEC behind Texas A&M with 33 sacks. Their best guy off the edge is James Pierce Jr. He's a sophomore, sort of a breakout season for him because he didn't really play a whole lot on defense a year ago as a freshman, but he's been pretty good. He's probably been their best guy. Tyler Barron is a guy that plays defensive end, will slide inside in some pass rush situations. He's been pretty good as well. They brought in Omar Norman Lott, a transfer from Arizona State, I think has brought some good things to that front. And then they've got a lot of guys back: Amari Thomas, Bryson Eason, Elijah Simmons has been healthy. He's a big guy in the middle there. And so when that group is playing well, I mean, Tennessee's defensive line dominated against South Carolina and Texas A&M, and were probably the main reason that the Vols were able to win those 2 games because they were able to just, Spencer Rattler never had time to get comfortable. Max Johnson took a beating that day at Neyland Stadium, and he seems to take one every week now behind that A&M offensive line. But that's the strength of this defensive line, and if you can block them up front, though, the secondary is susceptible. The linebackers have been up and down. They've had injuries there too. So in the secondary, they lost Kamal Haddon, who had emerged as their best cornerback midway through the season. Lost him against Alabama, and I think they've missed him over the last few games. This defense was, they were able to shut down Ray Davis a couple weeks ago for Kentucky, held him to 42 yards. Obviously, Cody Schrader shredded them last week. I think Missouri had like 9 runs of 10 plus yards, which was kind of uncharacteristic for what we've seen from Tennessee's run defense, which went into that game leading the SEC. So, but if they're able to get back to stopping the run and getting pressure on the quarterback, that's where this defense is at the best. But really over the past handful of games, that's been a little bit hit and miss. And I think the defense has kind of suffered for it.
Take a quick break, come back, and look specifically at this matchup, what we expect to see from the Bulldogs and the Volunteers on Saturday afternoon. Welcome back, everybody. Well, Patrick, starting with the injury front for Tennessee, what does it look like? We've talked about some of the guys who are out really more long-term for the Vols, but what is the injuries of note going into this game? Maybe some guys to keep an eye on for Tennessee.
Yeah, we've touched on a few of them, Jordan. Some of the longer-term injuries, obviously, maybe one of the newer ones is Dante Thornton Jr., wide receiver, who's not going to play after getting hurt against Missouri. They'll be starting a couple of redshirt freshmen, one of two of them, I should say, in his spot. Tamari McDonald is another guy who went down last week against Missouri early in the game. Looked to he made a tackle and was sort of favoring his shoulder, did not return. They're hoping to get him back this week. I'd probably say he's going to be questionable at this point. Josh Heupel said earlier in the week that they were hopeful that he could have a chance to play, but Heupel has been sort of inconsistent maybe with injury reports, as a lot of head coaches are. There's maybe another injury in the secondary that Tennessee may have to deal with, but this is a team that's, their injury list has continued to grow throughout the season. And I think John Campbell Jr. is another guy maybe on the offensive line to look at. I don't think he finished the game against Missouri. He got banged up against Kentucky. They held him out against UConn the following week. He started against Missouri, but not sure he finished that game. So he's another guy that's maybe a little banged up at this point of the season, as a lot of guys are. It's just kind of the nature of SEC football. But we don't get to see practice during the week. And Heupel, like I said, is a little not exactly forthcoming a lot of times with injuries. So sometimes there will be things that pop up on game days that we have to monitor and keep a track of. But this team's dealt with injuries all season, and they might have a couple more to deal with when they get to this game on Saturday.
For the folks who follow the Bulldogs, that is nothing new when it comes to keeping the injuries tight, close to the vest. That's for sure. When you look at this game, Patrick, what has to go right for Tennessee? What do the Vols have to do to have a chance to win this game? If you want to give a score prediction, you can. If not, just what has to go right for Tennessee to have a chance to pull off a really big upset?
Yeah, this is definitely a kind of shock the world situation for Tennessee because you're coming off a really bad performance and you're playing a team in Georgia that seems to be hitting its strides, got all its guys back. People probably thought Ole Miss could give them a game last week, and Georgia just sort of flexed its muscle and reminded everyone that it's Georgia. And so I think the biggest biggest advantage or biggest hope for Tennessee is that that the atmosphere is a big difference. It was a huge difference, I think, in this game last season. Georgia's crowd really brought in that game. I think Tennessee had 7 or 8 false starts. Tennessee's offense never looked comfortable. They were just sort of, I don't know if it was stage fright from being the number 1 team and being in that game. I don't know if it was just the shock of maybe the noise, like this is really loud and it's overbearing. But that's what Tennessee needs. I mean, they need this crowd to get Georgia off its game a little bit. And Tennessee has to play well enough to keep the crowd in the game. So, if they start well, get up a touchdown early. Tennessee took its opening drive down against Georgia for a touchdown 2 seasons ago against that defense that was really hard to score on. And Tennessee didn't really score on them again until the game was well in hand in the fourth quarter of that one 2 years ago. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. They also have to just play better on the lines of scrimmage. I think that's where it has to start. And that's a big ask because we know Georgia's always really, really good on their offensive line and on their defensive line. I think Tennessee has to be able to run the ball, get that running game going again with Jalen Wright and those guys. I think Joe Milton has to be a factor running the football as well, whether that's, on the zone read game, whether that's some design runs that are called from the sideline, some quarterback draws, things like that. He's had good moments when they've run it. Sometimes they maybe haven't run it enough. And defensively, it has to start on the defensive line. That group has to bring it this week. They have to bottle things up when Georgia tries to run the ball and try to get Georgia in 3rd and long. That's all you can do, and then try to get after the quarterback and hope that you can hang on in coverage long enough against all the weapons that they have. It was kind of funny yesterday after practice. We were talking to Brian Jean-Marie, Tennessee's linebackers coach, and he was asked about Brock Bowers only having a couple catches against Tennessee last season, and the question was phrased like, "What did you guys do to stop him?" And he was like, "I didn't say that. I didn't say we stopped him. We don't have a defense that like locks him up or anything like that." He was definitely not trying to have words put in his mouth there. But that's going to be a challenge. Tennessee's been struggling defending the middle of the field. Tight ends have had some good games against them. Obviously, Cody Schrader, running back, had a huge game against them as a receiver last week. So, but I think they've got to be able to get Georgia in some predictable situations, maybe, get them in some 3rd and 8s, some 3rd and 9s. And that's got to start with stopping the run. And then you got to try to get after them and try to get them uncomfortable and get the crowd making noise. And maybe you get a false start that makes it 3rd and 13 and you got to try to get off the field. That's where it's got to start, I think, for me. And Tennessee, obviously, if they can find an advantage in special teams, their punter was their best player last week in Jackson Ross. He can punt with both feet. He's an Aussie who kind of rugby styles it and has been really good at pinning teams deep. Maybe you get a situation like that where you can take advantage of it, unlike they were able to last week. But I think it's got to start with the crowd because home field advantage is going to be Tennessee's biggest edge in this game because there's really not a lot of places on the field where against this Georgia team, which is looking as it's looking to have as few vulnerabilities as its 2 predecessors. It's hard to find an area where Tennessee's going to have an advantage. So they've got to make the one that they do have, and that's the venue. They've got to make that one count in a big way. And that's going to start with playing better and playing harder and making enough plays that weren't made last week.
Yeah, mentioning the crowd, I'm not sure if I've ever heard Sanford Stadium louder than it was last year for that really highly.
Yeah, me neither, honestly.
Yeah, and I do think that's going to matter. I'll give my score prediction, read off the score predictions of the rest of the staff at Dawgs 24/7. I'm going to say Georgia wins 31-20. I think it's going to be a very competitive game. Georgia's kind of struggled a little bit on the road this year. Auburn, they were playing from behind, basically just had to lean on Brock Bowers in the fourth quarter and sort of let Brock be Brock, and they wind up winning that game. Vanderbilt, it wasn't exactly a raucous road environment, but it sort of was like Georgia was playing with its food for a little bit, and then Carson Beck nearly throws a pick six, and it's nearly a two-possession game there at the end. So I think it's going to be competitive. I think my biggest thing is just Georgia, as you mentioned, Patrick, has to win in the trenches. I think whoever wins in the trenches is able to run the football. It's going to matter a whole lot. Georgia's coming off its best game of the season as far as running the football. I want to see if they can continue that. And to your point, too, when you factor in crowd noise, when you factor in what that effect can have on an offense. 2 weeks ago when they played Missouri, when that game was super tight, Georgia struggled on first and second down. Their average yards to gain on third down was 7, and you cannot do that really at any point. But if you're playing on the road, giving an opponent's crowd a chance to get loud, it can cause a whole lot of issues. So I think it's going to be competitive. I think that Georgia does wind up winning 31-20, but I think Tennessee is going to make Georgia sweat throughout this game. Reading off some of the other predictions, Benjamin Wolk has Georgia 34-24. He says Dejon Edwards controls the fourth quarter, ices the game late in the action. And Kip Adams has Georgia 35-24. He says Malachi Starks has 2 interceptions in this game. So they are expecting some big plays, which I think no matter what, I do think it's going to be a pretty competitive game. Even though Tennessee does not have the East on the line, I think they understand that there's still pride to play for, and I think it's going to make for a really good game.
Yeah, I would agree, Jordan. I'd probably be in the same ballpark. We're going to have our score predictions on Friday afternoon at Go Vols 24/7. I'm probably in the 10 to 14 range. I'll probably pick Georgia by a couple touchdowns. I do think Tennessee will play better than it did last week. They can't honestly play that much worse, and they're just a team that plays better at home. And I think they know that. I think that'll help. I think that'll get their confidence going, and they'll be sharper. But ultimately Georgia's probably just going to have too much firepower, too much on defense. And again, Georgia's really the only defense that's had Tennessee's number the past 2 seasons. Tennessee's offense under Josh Heupel has put up a lot of points and a lot of yards. And, those 2 Georgia games were the ones that really before this year were a couple of the lower scoring games that they've had. So I'll be interested to see if Tennessee can generate any more success against this Georgia defense. And, I think it'll be competitive too. Again, if you're Tennessee, as you touched on pride. I mean, if you win this game, it sort of changes the narrative of your season, right? I mean, it gives you another famous win. And like I said, Heupel's beaten Alabama. He's beaten Florida. They beat Clemson and LSU last season as well. Georgia's the only team they really haven't beaten yet. And even Cooper Mays made a reference to that earlier this week when he said that Georgia's the one kind of rivalry game that he hasn't won yet. So, I think Tennessee will be fired up. I think they'll come out and play competitively. But again, Georgia's just every time that anybody thinks to start questioning Georgia or they get pushed a little bit, they always seem to respond. And that's what made this program so great. And it's why they've won a couple of national titles in a row and probably are the favorites to win a third. And probably I would expect them to win a third right at this point too. So, but I think Tennessee I hope they give them a good game. I don't want to watch another blowout. I'm sure you guys are sick of covering blowouts too, and probably want to see Georgia get pushed a little bit, see how they respond, and have some drama to worry about in the second half. So hopefully Tennessee can, I think they've got some players that can make that happen. But again, I think Georgia's Georgia at this point. You got to play perfect to beat them, and even if you play great, it might not matter anyway, and that could be the case. So I'd probably lean Georgia by. I think the line's 10. I'd probably pick Georgia to cover and probably go with a 2 touchdown spread. That's probably where I'm leaning at this point here, a couple of days before I have to actually send my prediction in.
Patrick, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast with us. Just let everybody know where they can follow you, where they can follow you guys at Go Vols 24/7, and anything you guys are cooking up before game day on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, we are at, I think it's Tennessee.247sports.com. We're at GoVols 24/7 on Twitter. I'm P Brown 247 on Twitter if you want to get my mentions and yell at me. Or you can just, you can probably tag me on the Junkyard. And we get notifications that way too. So we'll have our usual, like I said, we'll have our score predictions on Friday. I'll do an in-depth matchups piece on Thursday probably. We'll see if I can get it in on get it posted on Thursday with some of the other stuff going on. But that's usually where I kind of pick advantages. Obviously it'll be heavy Georgia advantage in a lot of them, but that's always one of our staple things. And And yeah, we'll have our bowl predictions too, a little bit like kind of what Kip's saying. A certain player will have 2 interceptions. That's sort of we do something like that as well on Fridays, and obviously, we'll have an injury report as best we can on Friday as well. So lots of coverage here over the next few days over on Go Vols 247, and I'm sure you guys will as well at Dawgs 247 as we get ready for this game.
We'll wrap it up right there. Make sure and go to Dawgs247.com. Go to GoVols247.com. Go check out all the content for us, all the info on this football team, also the men's basketball team. They're going to be playing in the Bahamas on Friday. Patrick, I'm really upset. I will say that's
going?
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice consolation to go to Knoxville, Tennessee instead. I mean, if you could do one or the other, I guess I can take that and make the most of it. But also go to Dawgs 247 on YouTube. You can watch these podcasts. You can watch Kirby Smart interviews, player interviews, Mike White press conferences, Georgia men's basketball interviews as well. So we'll wrap it up right there. For Patrick Brown, I am Jordan Hill. Until next time.